Eddie Conway, host of Rattling the Bars for the Real News Network. Last year, Florida voters approved a ballot measure called Amendment 4, which restored the voting rights of an estimated 1.5 million former felons. Republicans weren't pleased. To counter this Amendment 4, Republicans proposed a bill that would require former felons to pay court costs and fines before they are able to vote. What some activists are calling a poll tax. Florida imposes fines and user fees on defendants upon conviction in order to pay for their criminal justice system. The fines can be outrageous, up to $500,000. Felons coming home out of prisons are rarely able to pay these fines. Here to talk about this issue is Desmond Meade, president of Florida Right Restoration Coalition. Well, thanks for joining me, Desmond.
Eddie, it's great to be on with you, man.
Activists are liking this proposal to the poll tax Southern whites use to disenfranchise blacks, requiring black people to pay a fee to register to vote in the post-Civil War era. What do you think about this proposal?
I mean, Eddie, first, I think that there's some activists that's using that terminology, poll tax. We're not. We're not using that terminology for a couple of reasons. First of all, because um, the argument is around what is the completion of a sentence, even though it's that argument is being used as a way to prevent a barrier. At the heart of it is about what is completion of a sentence. And number two, the connotations of a poll tax really limits the people who are actually impacted by what's going on in the Florida legislature. Uh, what is impacting our poor people from actually all races, from all walks of life, from all political persuasions, who may not be able or could afford to actually pay a lot of these fines and fees. And so we are I'm dead set against what's going on now, or at least the legislation that has been introduced, particularly by the Florida House, because it does create an undue burden on returning citizens or people who've already served their time and paid their debt.
Well, would this bill violate the 15th Amendment?
Well, it's well when you're operating, under the guise of a sentence, no, of dealing with a sentence, like in this particular case, the Constitution definitely provides protection against a state hindering a person's right to vote. But remember that exception is when people are convicted of felony offenses, and that's always a loophole that a lot of these states use. And so when it gets into the purview of a criminal conviction, then it does not appear to necessarily be in violation of it, because the states have the right to actually deny a person the right to vote because of that conviction. What we're focusing in on now, because of the victory in Amendment 4, is that we have provided a pathway within our state's constitution that would allow a person, in spite of their conviction, to be able to vote. All right, and so I believe that at the crux of this is whether or not our state legislature want to expand or restrict the provisions of Amendment 4. Whether we want to make it easier for people to be able to register to vote, or whether you want to make it more difficult. And the path that they're taking now definitely says that they want to make it more difficult for people to vote.
Okay, can you just step back a minute and talk about these fines for felons? How much are they in general? And are former felons able to pay for them? And how does Florida justify fining people to pay their court costs?
Yeah, and so we know that the fines and fees can range from maybe a couple $100s to hundreds of thousands of dollars, depending on the offense. And we know that there are definitely a lot of fees that are attached to a defendant once once they go to court and go to trial. and that number may vary. What we do know also, for instance, in Miami-Dade, Florida, um, there is hundreds of millions of dollars that is owed in court fines and fees, and but how the court have approached it, they already know at the time that they administer the fees that the majority of folks could not afford to pay for it, and so they have basically written it off in a sense, or treated as a low level a collection, and so they would turn it over to a private company and allow them to charge a surtax of about 40%, and let them try to collect the fees. But the Miami-Dade County clerk not going after folks because they know that most of the folks can't afford to pay it.
Hmm. So this bill that's in the House right now, what stage is the bill at? Is it ready to get signed, or is there still some room to do something?
So the bill that was in the House, it went on the floor last week, and then they send the bill over to the Senate. Basically, in the state of Florida, what happens is that the House and the Senate may work on a particular version of a bill, and at some point, they have to share what they've worked on with each other, and they would call, I guess, what you call engage in a compromising conference, which allows both sides to negotiate what the final verbiage of that bill would be. And then if both the House and the Senate passes that final or that compromise version, then it would go to the governor's desk to see whether he signs it or not. Um, right now at this stage, the House have already submitted their version. We're still waiting on the Senate to submit their version. Another option that the Senate has is that it can just accept the House version and not even submit its own. And in a case like that, that would go before the governor as well. And so, what we're hoping for is that the Senate would, at the very minimum, submit its version, and in that process, we're hoping that if any of the versions prevail, it would be the Senate version.
Okay, so what are activists on the ground in Florida, and obviously you're leading up this charge, doing to stop this bill?
Well, it's very little that we could do on the outside. I mean, this is really an inside game.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
It really is, and it's just a matter of really somehow or another communicating to these elected officials to really honor the will of the voters, Florida voters, um, to get them to understand that some of this legislation is harmful, not only to people like me, but is also harmful to people in their own communities as well. And hope that they would see the light, or have a shift in opinion. We can recommend some changes. And in some cases, it seems like they were willing to listen to some of the recommendations. In some cases, it seems like they're not. And so it's really a back and forth. And really, no one knows where we're going to land within the next day or two on this. There's a lot of anxiety, uncertainty in this process. But at the end of the day, what we do know is, regardless of what comes out of this session, we are prepared to challenge any provisions that we feel are unconstitutional, and we're also prepared to continue to engage with returning citizens and get them registered to vote, get them activated and involved in the upcoming elections.
Mhm. Is there any way to determine how many former felons is going to be affected by this new law around the fines and fees?
I mean, and I think that that's a great question, and I think the answer to that would be speculative.
Hmm.
It it would take a ton of energy and resources to really drill down that deep.
Hmm.
But I do know that there are some estimates out there that will say that it would probably impact, a little less than half of the 1.4 million.
Okay. Okay. One last question. Is there anything that activists in other states can do to rally around this issue uh, or support whatever challenges y'all may raise in the future if this doesn't turn out well?
Well, the Florida Rights Restoration Coalition, we are an organization that's led by directly impacted people. We are the lead organization in this fight. We were the ones that led the Amendment 4 efforts, and we're leading this advocacy efforts as it pertains to Amendment 4. What folks can do, number one, is support the organization. As as we're moving forward, and we're having to defend any unconstitutional provisions that may come out of this session. Being able to have support to make sure that we are represented by a strong and competent legal team would be great. The other option that people have is that at some point after the dust has settled, that we will be establishing a mechanism that folks around the country will be able to contribute to a centralized fund that would assist a lot of these individuals in paying their fines and fees so we can get them registered and engaged. And so your viewers are welcome to go to our website, which is www.florida, spelled out, rrc.com. That's www.floridarrc.com, and they can visit our website and engage in those two ways in helping us, fight back this attack against an Amendment 4 win, and to help returning citizens, man, just be a part of this country again.
Okay, all right. So what I'm gonna do is I'm gonna stay on top of this, and as soon as something break one way or another, we're gonna
Yes,
try to do a follow up on this. Okay?
most definitely, Eddie, most definitely.
Okay. Thank you for joining me, Desmond.
Hey, Eddie, thank you so much for having me on, man, and I'm looking forward to really chatting with you real soon. Hopefully, it's with good news.
Okay, I heard that. Okay,
Yes.
and thank you for joining this episode of Rather Than the Bars.